Bueno, buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a este encuentro organizado por mi amigo Ángel de la Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. Un encuentro que tiene como título la búsqueda de la estrategia, de Open Strategic Autonomy, o también estratégica abierta, que siempre hablamos en inglés, me cuesta. Que es sin duda uno de los temas más importantes a los cuales no solo se está abordando, sino que estamos cabalgando. O sea, en esta legislatura, algunos de los elementos de los debates que se han impulsado han estado marcados por la lógica, los cambios, las transformaciones, las amenazas que ha vivido la Unión Europea, y la búsqueda de una autonomía estratégica abierta ha sido uno de ellos. Y estamos en ello. Estamos todavía... Todos tenemos claro qué significa, pero hay significados que a veces no coinciden, ¿no? Y estamos hoy, además, en un día donde tenemos unas movilizaciones de granjeros europeos, de agricultores europeos, aquí en Bruselas, que se unen a este debate colectivo, complicado, complejo, de qué queremos ser, cómo lo queremos hacer y cómo podemos hacerlo sin que eso tenga un impacto muy severo en nuestras sociedades, ¿no? Y sobre todo, ¿qué significa? Le decía que todos compartimos las ideas, pero después, cómo se declinan, pues ya no coinciden. Hemos visto cómo esta necesidad de tener una autonomía estratégica abierta, hemos incorporado lo de abierto, al principio se hablaba de autonomía estratégica, ahora es autonomía estratégica abierta, soberanía estratégica abierta. Se les van incorporando matices porque empiezan a colisionar algunos conceptos. Después los expertos lo desarrollarán mucho mejor. Yo lo hablo desde la perspectiva del debate político que se ha tenido en esta casa. Y por lo tanto, debatir sobre un concepto clave acerca de qué quiere ser la Unión Europea y qué tiene que hacer para serlo requiere encuentros más allá de lo político. Este es un espacio de debate político, de decisión política, de legislación política, pero también es un espacio de encuentro, de debate, de discusión entre la academia, los responsables legislativos, los políticos, think tanks, sociedad civil, alumnos, ciudadanos, para participar en el debate político necesario para reflexionar sobre cuáles son los retos que tenemos y qué tenemos que hacer para darles respuesta. Son a veces debates que no son especialmente interesantes mediáticamente, pero los debates que no son interesantes mediáticamente son aquellos que condicionan realmente nuestras vidas. Y que esta casa, que el Parlamento Europeo, sea capaz y tenga como uno de sus fines permitir el debate más allá de lo estrictamente político, aunque todo es político, pero no sobre la política, sino sobre lo político, aunando, como decía, academia, en este caso academia, comisión, consejo, responsables, expertos, es sin duda una muy buena noticia de uno de los temas que van a condicionar quiénes somos en el mundo y, por tanto, qué podemos ser, no solo como sociedad, sino como ciudadanos, ¿no? Por lo tanto, yo creo que vais a tener hoy un grupo de expertos realmente notable. Yo, como diputado, lo único que he hecho ha sido abriros la puerta de esta sala, cederosla para que podáis conversar, para que podáis reflexionar, para que también nos ayudéis a cuando tengamos que tomar decisiones políticas, poder avanzar en la línea correcta, que aúne nuestros intereses como sociedad sin que eso vaya en contra de los intereses como ciudadanos, ¿no? A veces parece lo mismo, pero a veces colisiona. Y yo creo que nuestra responsabilidad es intentar que esas posibles colisiones se amortigüen o se eviten. tenemos que ser capaces de explicar lo que hacemos, tenemos que ser capaces de hacernos sensibles las reflexiones estratégicas con las necesidades prácticas y cotidianas de nuestros ciudadanos, ¿no? Y en eso la academia y los decisores políticos o legislativos no pueden ser ajenos. Por lo tanto, yo aquí concluyo, os dejo. Bienvenidos a vuestra casa. Cualquier cosa que podáis necesitar en los próximos 3 meses, aquí estaremos y espero poderos ver en el próximo mandato. Y si no, espero que podáis seguir viniendo a esta casa a debatir sobre lo realmente importante. Gracias, Ángel.
Thank you very much, Jordi. It's really impressive the place, impressive the room, and impressive your support for this event, because that's the idea. The academia and the institution try to speak together to at least debate this kind of problems, which are out of the focus of the big media and the big political quarrels, and go to the kind of things that I think, and many people, as we think, that really interesting and really important for us. So, second, sorry for the delays. It has been a tough day in Brussels, but as far as I remember, almost every day is tough in Brussels. So it's quite unusual what happened today, but it's not unusual at all from this point of view. So sorry for being late here. And third, thank you very much for the panel. This is a super panel. We have here experts from critical raw materials, from supply chains, which I choose because they are, I guess, I'm not sure. Let's talk about this now. But I think this is the most important thing inside the concept of strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy, because there is a lot of stake here. And as we are very short of time and it is very late, I stop here and I give the floor first to our two main speakers, which are Estelle Appelbaum and Roman Arjona, which I will ask you to introduce first. What is the concept of open strategic autonomy? And second, I will ask Estelle to talk about a bit your flagship report of future shocks, which I think is excellent job of what could happen in the European Union in the coming years. So, Roman, first. Okay.
Muchas gracias. Bienvenidos a todos. Quería dar las gracias particularmente al profesor Ángel Rodríguez García Brazales, porque me contactó para este evento hace ya mucho tiempo y con una, digamos, propuesta muy interesante. También, por supuesto, a Jordi Cañas por tener la llave de esta sala, y también es un placer pues estar aquí con Eshel y sus colegas del Servicio de Investigación del Parlamento. I will be switching perhaps to English, so my colleagues, who I'm sure follow Spanish as well, but in any case, to be a little bit more precise, my idea was to speak to you a little bit about open strategic autonomy, and notably about how to approach it using evidence and using data, because this is a topic which is very catchy, as Jordi was saying, for a political debate, but where many times having enough informed evidence to support the claims might not be that simple. So in my team, I'm chief economist at the Directorate General responsible for industrial policy and the single market. And in my team, we try to modestly shed some light on some of these issues which are important for us, such as strategic dependencies, supply chain distress, and other kinds of aspects which are linked to the global changing dynamics that Jordi was mentioning before. So if I can have, I will just give a couple of slides and then I stop, and then we can catch up later if necessary with a little bit more of information. But just to give you a little bit the backdrop of the concept, if I can have, somebody can put the next one. Yeah. Here, basically, I think that we have to be aware that when we are talking about open strategic autonomy, there is a number of aspects that we have to factor in. So Europe was already, and not only Europe, but the world, facing a number of really deep and very complex societal challenges for a very long time. These were societal challenges in the social, in the environmental, in the economic sphere, and all of them somehow intertwined. I'm talking here about climate change, the aging of the population, a massive digitalization of industry and society. And this was already for quite some time generating what I would say tensions in the system. These tensions could emerge in the form of inequalities, social inequalities, territorial inequalities, divergences in wages, divergences in skills, and many others. And this has also, to a very large extent, created polarization in politics, polarization in as well, in the way that people perceive themselves in society, and what we could call discontent. In fact, there is Andrés Rodríguez Posse, who is professor at the London School of Economics, who has researched quite a lot on this issue of the geography of discontent. And he has found links between places that are left behind from the economic mainstream, that are disconnected from the kind of industrial transformation, where, links between those places and phenomena such as Brexit, for example, in the UK. So you can trace polarization to a large extent as well, to socioeconomic dynamics in this kind of world that is changing very fast. And we might have been a little bit kind of candid to a large extent as well in Europe and in other places of the world, when we thought that we had these challenges duly identified and we had all the solutions on the table. I mean, we had very ambitious goals. So, for example, the 55% greenhouse gas emission reduction target. We had very ambitious policies such as the European Green Deal, which for sure you're very familiar with, or very ambitious funding with Next Generation EU and others. But then comes what my former master's colleague and possibly future president of Finland, Alex Stubb, calls the age of disorder. So Alex is leading the School of Transnational Governance in the European University Institute in Florence. And he is kind of talking about this age of disorder where continuous disruptions that we have witnessed in the form of the COVID and health disruptions, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and all other phenomena, the Red Sea crisis, etc. So we're all kind of waiting to see what is the next black swan that is approaching, what is the next gray rhino, as we call them, so the next elephant in the room that everybody is seeing that is coming, but nobody is able, to take a decision with respect to that, and this can generate a problem. And a large part of these tensions, geopolitical tensions, supply chain distress, scarce energy resources, dependencies on raw materials, these are things that are here to stay for a while as well. So we have to factor that in. And I think that all of that is also something which the economists call recently the Mona Lisa effect. So there is a very high uncertainty in the system. And when you look at Mona Lisa, you can see her smile or not. And this is because Leonardo used sfumato around the face of Mona Lisa. So the contours of the face are not very precisely defined. And I think that that's a little bit what is happening as well right now with the economic dynamics in general. The contours, what before 10 years ago were very, very, very clearly defined contours, this is also vanishing. And this is a bit like post-pandemics economics. So these adjustment mechanisms got blurred. And every time you look, you see something different. And everybody starts to wonder, is the recession going to be hard landing? Is it going to be? And there are no concrete, let's say, very precise answers to these questions. So if I can have a next slide, and I'm almost, let's say, at the end of my introduction. I would say that we have to take into account, if you click a couple of times, there will be a lot of things moving in the slide because it's one of these fancy ones that, in any case, it doesn't matter. So what I wanted to say is that we live in a world that is changing very, very fast and where we have a lot of uncertainty in the system more than ever before. This uncertainty is to a very large extent also systemic. And this is why we need to look at certain things from that optics, no? And when we look at strategic dependencies of the EU and we look at the vulnerabilities of the European Union, we have seen, for example, that when the COVID-19 crisis was hitting, this kind of woke up the need to launch open strategic autonomy policies to secure industrial and economic resilience where it was needed. There were disruptions of the health ecosystem, with protective equipment, surgical gloves, vaccines, and all kinds of things, that were kind of suddenly in a new way of working. And also we had this then transfer later down the stream to chips, to fertilizers, and to other products, which actually many of those have a big impact for the green and digital transition of Europe, because the green and digital transition of Europe requires, for example, access to raw materials, rare earths, permanent magnets, and my colleagues then that work on critical raw materials here, they know this better than I do, but also access to technologies such as chips, cloud technology, for which we are currently very dependent on third countries. So what did Joe Biden do when he first arrived to the US? He created an office to deal with, to do an analysis of the global value chain position of the US. And there were 2 reports that were done in relation to that also inspired other types of action that was put on the table. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act. Also, China confirmed that strategic autonomy was in its 5-year plan. And then if I can have kind of my last slide on this, if you click a bit more, because there are some articles coming down from all sides of the slide, but the next one, yeah, this one, exactly. So these risks, let's say, of strategic dependencies and supply chain distress, we have to take into account that they are not horizontal. They are not hitting the economy in the same way. There is an heterogeneous impact, and there are some important supply risks that are emerging in the area of raw materials, indeed, and clean technologies for the green transition. And then there are risks that may materialize through these bottlenecks and unforeseen events due to uncertainty. But then there are other risks which are in the form of deliberate policies of certain countries that lead to kind of weaponization, so to say, of dependencies. I mean, we have seen recently examples where some big third countries have kind of put forward export restrictions on certain raw materials such as gallium and germanium, which are very critical for the for the green transition. So the last thing I wanted to say is in the next slide is that what is the EU approach to strengthen open strategic autonomy? Because Angel was asking me about that the other day in an email. And I think the summary in the slide is very clear. We are pursuing what is laid down in the Industrial Strategy of 2021 and the Green Deal Industrial Plan. We will, I think the approach to open strategic autonomy can be summarized as let's cooperate wherever we can and let's act autonomously wherever we must. So I think it's a rather pragmatic approach. It's not protectionism building. It's not building a fortress Europe where we will produce everything in autarky, but it's about not being naive and being capable of identify, anticipate, and deal with vulnerabilities that might be essential for the goals that we have set ourselves in the future. So I think with this, I would stop for now. Then I have other more technical slides that I reserve in case I need. Thank you, Angel.
Thank you very much, Roman. I think it's a very excellent introduction to the concept of strategic autonomy, and it is why it's so important for us right now. And now I think, Essel, maybe you can draw the contours of Mona Lisa with your future shock report. Or maybe we can try to do it to some extent. So please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm from the European Parliamentary Research Service. So our objective is to support members individually and also parliamentary committees the best we can to come to well-informed decisions because they have to approve all the laws in the European Union. And we do this through individual support to members in confidential requests, but also with proactive publications. And part of these proactive publications have been the future shocks, to which we will come at a later stage. The unit in which I'm working is, so to speak, the facilitator and the provider for policy foresight and forward-looking policy advice in the European Parliament. We are very few, we're just 10, but we count on the support of colleagues from the Members Research Service, where you will find 120 people in their different policy areas, and I brought 3 of them with me today, who are our experts on critical raw materials, the subject you choose for today's presentation. My role here is more to inform you a little bit about policy foresight. So let me take a step back and be a little bit more theoretical. Why do we do policy foresight? Well, the crisis we recently witnessed have just been mentioned. We saw COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis. We're seeing a new war now between Israel and Hamas. We see the danger linked to global trade in the Red Sea. So we are in a way in an area of polycrisis. And in times of complexities, when policy issues are connected and consequences of actions sometimes unclear, it can be difficult to make decisions which are resilient to future changes. So our policy analysts have to stay true to the best possible evidence while taking into account concerns and expectations of the population, the citizens, and also unforeseen events. Foresight as a discipline can support policy making, decision making by a holistic and future-oriented way of thinking. It offers practical tools that help to disentangle the complexity in which we live and to create robust and resilient plans of action emanating from the present. And we call this application policy foresight, the name of our unit, to distinguish it from other applications of foresight, for instance, technological or commercial or scientific foresight. Let me give you a brief overview on different foresight techniques so that it becomes a little bit more concrete what we're talking about. Some foresight experts emphasize the difference of their discipline from forecasting, which is an evidence-based form of projecting futures based on available data, for instance, used in economic forecasts or weather forecasts. Forecasts tend to be correct for shorter periods of time and lack the flexibility of including future uncertainties in the long term. Another area of research that is linked to foresight is the analysis of trends. Trend analysis is based on past and ongoing developments, which can be projected into the future by extrapolation. In that sense, they are not yet true foresight, because they rest on what can be observed already. An example of a trends analysis by EPRS is our annual publications, 10 Issues to Watch, which has been recently presented in the library reading room, and you can watch the event, which was hosted there on our YouTube channel. Some foresight techniques are more evidence-based, such as literature review, quantitative modeling, or horizon scanning. These methods do not depart much from present reality and often form the first steps in a foresight process. Others are more based on creativity, trying to imagine possible futures, in plural, in stories and images. And these include scenario writing, simulation gaming, and ultimately even science fiction. So we are not doing science fiction here. Apart from the polarity between evidence and imagination, foresight is also characterized by a polarity between the individual experience and the group interaction. In particular, policy foresight needs group interaction to include different views on possible futures and to avoid blind spots or the bias of individual experts. Minimizing blind spots and reducing bias can help avoiding distortion and false or unrealistic conclusions. Foresight needs to critically test assumptions that people may have about future developments and use conversation techniques and stakeholder analysis to involve as many perspectives on the future as possible. It is therefore important that the process is collaborative, participatory, and is bringing together diverse stakeholders and expertise from various fields. Collaboration leads to a more comprehensive understanding of complex issues by breaking silos among different sectors and helps ensure the outcomes of the work to be objective and sound. A simple tool to verify the inclusiveness of stakeholders panels is by applying the steeped principle to their professional backgrounds. A diverse group of stakeholders should include people with expertise in social matters, technology, the economy, the environment, political and legal matters, ethical questions, and democracy. All these aspects can be seen in a diamond that sorts the various forms of foresight and is based on evidence versus creativity or interaction versus expertise. Before now diving into more specific things, I would hand over again to you.
So thank you very much. And as I said, we are really short of time, so I'm not going to deep a bit more in the topics for today, which I will ask you right now is the time for Roman again, for Guillaume, to tell us. I was about to say very briefly, but I think it's almost impossible to say what has happened in the last 4 years in the European, but they will say also in the global value chains, and second in the area of the critical raw materials, because the things are going very, 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 very fast, and it's almost impossible to catch up with the whole thing. So please. Yeah.
Okay. You can hear me, yes? I think so, but not 100% sure. I think that now is better. Yes. I will try not to take too much time because I'm conscious that we don't have it. And I want also to listen to Guillaume, to be honest, so it's a bit of an egotistical kind of thing. But I still wanted to tell you a little bit what we have been doing to try to disentangle this complexity of measuring aspects that are related to the disruptions and the dependencies that we have in the European Union and globally. So if I can go back to the set of slides that I had, if somebody is capable of turning it on and moving to slide number 8, for example, I can tell you about something that we did, which is that we actually thought, okay, if we want to approach how if we want to approach how what type of dependencies the European Union is facing vis-a-vis third partner countries, where do we start from? And there are different ways of doing this, but we decided to start from looking at very disaggregated trade data. So we went to the whole panoply of goods in which the EU is trading with third partner countries. And that makes it for 5,400 products. So the whole universe of goods, everything you can imagine that the EU is trading with third partner countries. We looked at the period of 4 years, and then we decided to apply some very neutral, scientific-based, data-driven methodology. So we constructed a methodology in which first we said, okay, let's look at the concentration of imports, because you will have, of course, dependencies that are more critical emerging when the imports from third partner countries that the EU does are more concentrated. Let's also put another filter to look at the scarcity of goods. So we are examining what is the share of extra EU imports in total EU imports of some of those goods. And then we said also, let's try to put a threshold on the substitutability, the potential of substitutability of these goods, because it's not the same, let's say, to import a good where you have some production inside the single market than to import one where you don't have the capacity to replace. No? So concentration, let's say the diversification and the potential for substitutability. And then we limit it to a number of what we call industrial ecosystems, which is a way of aggregating industrial sectors that is more meaningful, because we look also at the cross relations between the sectors. So we looked at goods that were falling under the health kind of industrial ecosystem, the ecosystem related to safety and security of citizens, and the one related to goods and inputs that are critical for the green transition. So we started from 5,400 goods, and introducing subsequently these filters, we arrived to 204 goods, which is our magical number, where we detected that the EU was facing particularly strong dependencies in terms of their concentration of imports, low capacity for replacement by internal production. And what are these goods and where are they located? If I can have the next slide. What we have here is basically, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a map of the distribution of these 204 dependencies across origins in the world. So we identified 204 goods for which the EU is dependent. We saw that 64 out of those 204 goods are coming from China, 38 from the US, and 15 from Russia. And in terms of import value, China is still the main source of these dependencies, with more than half of the import value dependencies. So you will wonder, what are these goods? Well, there's a bit of everything in that. I did not put a slide on this, but we can distribute them across these different industrial ecosystems I was talking about before. So whether it's health, goods that are essential for the green and digital transition, including critical raw materials, permanent magnets, and others. But we have, like, for example, cell phones or laptops from China, so a bit on the high-tech end, turbines and some types of vehicles from the US, and then iron, steel, and coal from Russia, for example. And then we need to detect these blind spots that Escher was talking about in a different context, but I profit because I like the name. So we need to, this is, of course, the result of a data-driven exercise, but then we need to analyze with experts operating in those different areas, such as critical raw materials, whether these goods that we have detected as dependent are absolutely critical, let's say, for the different industrial sectors and ecosystems. But what we did recently, and that's in the next slide, is that we actually refined that methodology. And then we said, okay, that's good that we have 204 dependencies. But what about if we try to look at choke points? So puntos de ahogo, no? What we call single points of failure, or SPOF, which we thought was very nice because it has like this SPOF sound. No? So there, when you look at SPOF, then what we did is we looked at the global trade networks. So we didn't look already at the EU dependencies. We looked at how global trade networks are structured around the world, and then we looked at goods which have a particularly high concentration of production in a single country, and that country is very central to many other countries around the world. So then when you have that and you combine it with the dependencies, with the 204 dependencies that we had before, you get to a map like the one you have in front of you, where you see that about 20% of the 204 dependencies that we had identified are subject to choke points. And again, China is one of these main sources. No? There are some examples on the slide which you probably cannot read, but in any case, this is about, for example, solar panels and cell phones from China, certain parts of turbojets from the US, engines from Japan, hydrocarbons from Russia, so we can detect geopolitical, let's say, distribution of dependencies and choke points. So that's, I thought, I would tell you a little bit about this. And then let me just show you something else, and with that I will finish, is that three slides further down the road, I think, more or less. Yeah, that one. This is a slide in which, you will wonder, what is this? So basically, we decided at a certain moment we needed as well not only to understand dependencies, but let's try to understand where supply chain disruptions are happening. Where are the kind of supply chain of Europe starting to get hit by all kinds of disruptions that are happening elsewhere because of COVID or because of other type of issues. And these disruptions, they lead to shortages or price increases. And we have seen this with the, as I was saying, with the protective equipment during the COVID crisis, with chips, with fertilizers, and with raw materials. So there we said, okay, let's exploit some customs data that our colleagues in Digitaxud, so I'm from the European Commission, Digitaxud is responsible for customs and taxation, and they have a database which measures all the entries and exits of goods into the EU on a daily basis. So there we kind of decided, okay, let's take that database, and we're going to look at inflationary pressures, so big increases in prices or big decreases in quantities at product level, and see where there are imbalances, where the supply of a certain good cannot keep up with the demand. And how did we do this? Because we had no clue how to let's say, disentangle the different technological designs that are available out there. We decided, first of all, to focus only on net zero technologies, so on solar panels, batteries, heat pumps, fuel cell, and wind turbines. And then we engaged an engineer with knowledge about how to read technological designs. And we asked this person, can you trace back kind of what are the prevalent technology designs for some of these technologies that are used in Europe? And so you see in this slide many technology designs with different fancy names. The ones that are in blue and dark blue are actually the ones that are prevalent or more used commercially in Europe. And for instance, in the next slide, you have what we did for the case of wind turbines. So there we started from looking at 19 designs, 19 technological designs, out of which 11 were for onshore wind technologies, 12 for offshore wind technologies. These are all the designs that are available out there. And then through our analysis with this engineer, we saw that actually there were top the top two designs for onshore wind are making up to 70% of the EU market. And for offshore wind, one design is capturing 99% of the EU market. So then we said, okay, now let's try to unveil or identify what are the corresponding raw materials that are fitting into these technological designs for offshore and onshore wind. And then we monitor increments in prices and decreases in quantities. And that's what you have in the next slide. So I will finish this with this, but just to say, we see big differences in terms of the raw materials for which supply chain distress is felt. And we can go to the very nitty-gritty details. So we see, for example, for onshore wind, nickel and to some extent chromium, molybdenum have seen increases in prices and decreases in quantities. And for offshore wind, it's mostly silicon and copper, for example. So what does this say to us? Well, it says that we need a certain level of granularity to understand, where the distress is happening and to put in place the right policy measures to be able to tackle these issues. Thank you. I pass you the floor back.
Thank you very much. So it has been an excellent exposition about the problems we have with the European value chains. And now I think it's time for Guillaume to deep a bit on this. But I will ask you, please, if you can explain to our audience, which are youngster students of the university, what is the meaning here in Brussels, the meaning of critical raw materials, because it has a very specific sense, which is not something in the air. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a great topic, critical raw materials. You will see, and I like it a lot because it's very concrete. It's a fundamental topic for everything we have around us. We can really touch it with our hands. So to start, I would just like to highlight that in 2021, the Commission identified secured access to critical raw materials as one of the top 10 strategic issues for the EU. So why is that? To begin, maybe if my PowerPoint could be open. We need to go very far from here. We need to go even 14 billion years behind us when the Big Bang happened. Because what happened when the Big Bang happened, what science tells us, is that at the beginning you only had two elements in the universe, helium and hydrogen. And then it took billions of years after an incredible amount of chemical reactions occurring in stars. All the elements that we currently know, they were created in the universe and in the stars. That's why maybe you know that we are all stardust, meaning that all the elements that we are made of come from the star, from the universe. Next slide, please. So what's the current situation? In fact, in the universe, we have 118 known elements, which are the individual bricks of which everything around us is made. So it's not the same to talk about steel, because steel is an alloy, than talking about, for example, cadmium. Cadmium is a single element, for example, and iron is an individual element. You use iron to make steel, but you need several elements to produce steel. Can you click just once? So here I have highlighted one of these elements, which is strontium. Do you know why it is highlighted in this slide? Well, there is a link with Spain because, in fact, strontium is an element that is produced mainly in Spain. I mean, 1/3 of the EU global supply of strontium comes from Spain. So it's a really a specific example of the role of Spain in the global market for critical raw materials. So all the macroscopic properties of everything that's around us are based on the physical properties of these bricks. And you cannot decide by a law that this element will change its properties. No, you have the physical laws. And in fact, humanity has to adapt to the physical properties of these elements to build a lot of industrial goods. So if you can click, the first example, very well known, is electric cars. So the materials in an electric car are really important, much more important than in a normal car. For example, you have in an average car, electric car, you have 8 kilos of lithium, for example. which is not at all the case in a conventional car, because lithium is used in the batteries that are used by electric vehicles. For example, if you take the price of lithium in a conventional car, or in an electric car, just the price of lithium that you need, it's already as expensive as the engine of a diesel car, of a small diesel car. So this shows you that the critical raw materials inside an electric car are really important. And in fact, it's the main issue for car makers today, is to find the right critical raw materials at a good price and at a secure supply of raw materials to build their electric cars. Second example, next slide, please. So, which is quite interesting for you, I guess, smartphones, tablets, and laptops, they are full of critical raw materials. The most known is silicon. So you know the Silicon Valley. Why is it called the Silicon Valley? Because the chips, the semiconductors, they were invented in the California in the 50s. And as they are based on silicon, and why are they based on silicon? Because silicon has some specific physical properties. Silicon is able to allow electric currents to flow, and you can control the flows of electricity, and that's in the chips, and that allows to build semiconductors that store data, compute data if you need to do some calculations, or the sensors like your cameras in your smartphone, they rely on specific critical materials based on silicon, and for example, indium, germanium, gallium. And we said, and recently, that China blocked the export of germanium and gallium recently. And the third example, not the least example, especially in the current context, in the defense sector, critical raw materials are extremely important because they also give specific properties to a lot of weapons. And naturally, you can think about specific alloys that are made with some CRMs that are very strong. You see some navigation system that use germanium, beryllium, tantalum. So this is really crucial because history has shown that the countries that don't have access to the right critical raw materials, they lose the wars. So if we don't have access to the correct critical materials, we might lose some wars if needed. So in my next slide, I will very shortly present the specificities of the supply chains of critical raw materials, just for you to know that they are global, very complex and vulnerable to disruptions as they are very much concentrated. So to extract critical raw materials, there are several steps. Then first you mine, you extract them, then you process them, you refine them using energy and water, and then you build the final goods. And here on this graph, you can see the volume of production in the three major countries producing the CRMs at different stages. For example, lithium at extraction stage, Australia, Chile, and China are the three, well, they account for nearly 90% in total of lithium extraction. Then if you take the next step, China, Chile, and then another country, very smaller one, Argentina. So they represent 100% of processing of lithium, which is a major step. So you can see on this graph, for example, that graphite, 100% of it is processed in China. So, and all the red that you can see shows the importance of China in the supply chain of some critical raw materials. Next slide, please. And on the next slide, you are at the stage of manufacturing capacity of clean technologies. On top, you have photovoltaic panels, different stages, like wind power, wind onshore, wind offshore, etc., etc. And all the red that you can see is the share of China in the different manufacturing capacities of these clean technologies. So this is an illustration of the strategic dependencies we have, for example, vis-à-vis China. But this is quite known at the moment. So in the European Union, as you said, what do critical raw materials, refer to concretely? Concretely, they are classified as critical raw materials based on their both economic importance and supply risk. So horizontally, you have a set of critical raw materials which were assessed by the European Commission, and vertically their supply risk. And in fact, a subset of all these materials that were assessed were chosen to be called critical raw materials. And I will tell you a bit more just in the next slides. So now at the moment, we have 34 critical raw materials in Europe. You have them on this graph. But there is a new concept, in fact, that was introduced recently in a new EU law that was agreed at EU level in November this year. So it's very recent. It's not even entered into force. It will enter into force very soon. But you have 16 strategic raw materials, which are even more important than critical raw materials. So the thresholds are even higher, meaning that these ones, we really want to have a secure access in Europe to these materials. Next slide, please. So here you have a very recent information, latest information on the new CRM Act. You can you click, please? So the new EU law on critical raw materials identifies the strategic raw materials and the critical raw materials. So you have to know that it's also a political choice. It's based on scientific data, but as it's now included in EU law, you have some critical raw materials that are in the list, but that didn't score the highest in the scientific parameters. But I see, so it's for cobalt and nickel. But we consider that as it's very important for the battery sector, they are included in this list to be sure that the private sector is very well aware of the importance of these materials, and also the public sector. So this EU law will improve the support to some strategic projects in the EU and also in third countries, which will increase the supply of critical raw material, of strategic raw materials in Europe and in third countries. So with faster permitting, improved access to finance. Second, and very important, monitoring of supply chains and mitigation of possible risk has been improved. There will be a new monitoring dashboard for critical raw materials. Some stress tests will be carried out by the Commission on the SRM supply chain, on SRM supply chains. The Commission could suggest strategies such as stockpiling of strategic raw materials or diversification of imports for specific member states. There could be also joint purchasing of some strategic raw materials if needed by the Commission. Third pillar are also a set of measures to improve the circularity and sustainability of CRMs consumed in the EU, because the CRM productions have big impacts on the environment because they use a lot of water and energy. So member states have to draw up national programs supporting circularity. Their CRMs should also be recovered from extractive waste. There will be in the future some mandatory recycled content for permanent magnets, meaning permanent magnets, they are used in electric cars and in wind energy production. So meaning that it would encourage the industry to recycle the critical raw materials. At the moment, it's not so well developed. And also there would be a set of measures to limit the impact on the environment of CRM production. Next click, please. Oh, yes. So the EU has set some benchmarks for mining of critical materials in the EU. By 2030, 10% of our consumption of strategic raw materials should be mined in Europe, which is enormous compared to today, because today it's around 1% only. And we know that the people are normally a bit against mining in their country because it has a bad reputation. So this is a big challenge. We should be able to process 40% of our strategic raw materials consumption and to recycle 25% of our consumption by 2030. Last but not least, we should not depend on a single country, third country, for more than 65% of the supply of each strategic raw material. So we have very concrete targets for the EU, and it will be a challenge to reach them. Next slide, please. In international cooperation, my colleagues will mention that later on. So to conclude, I will just mention two very, I would say, topical issues. The issues of stockpiling of strategic raw materials. this is a map of, in the world, which countries have strategic stockpiles of critical raw materials. You have the United States, Russia, Switzerland, but in the EU, there are no strategic stocks. And in fact, the Critical Raw Materials Act didn't manage to force member states to have strategic stocks. They were quite reluctant on this idea, even the companies. So in the EU, for example, for the moment, we do not have EU stocks or anything that would help us in case of a disruption of production of strategic raw material. We would not have any stock. So that's an issue. Maybe in the future it will evolve, but for the moment, there is no solution at this level in the EU. Secondly, we have some tensions between environmental impact and the necessity to be autonomous. The demonstrations of today by farmers in Brussels is a bit the same issue. Impact on the environment of food production. Here, we have the impact on the environment of critical raw materials production, and very recently, Norway was the first country to allow exploration for critical raw materials in deep seas, which is a very controversial topic. It could have very serious environmental impacts. The European Parliament, in a resolution, said that it was against deep sea mining as long as there are no scientific data showing that it could be done. For the European Commission, it's the same. So I think this tension between environment and autonomy is a very serious issue that will be also, I'm sure, during the European election debates, very present. So with this, I will conclude my presentation. I hope you liked it.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. You know, it's very important to come here to Brussels because it is the first time I learned that the strontium exists and Spain is a superpower producing strontium. So it's important to come here to Brussels. And now we are going to get into the last part of the session, which is, to me, is my favorite, because it's when I ask our speaker to do science fiction, which is what is going to happen in the coming years. And I have prepared two questions, the easy one for Roman and the difficult and hard one for them, which is the first one is the policies. What are we going to do here, not in Madrid, here in Brussels, about to secure the global supply chains? And the hard one is for you, because I asked you about what could happen in the case of more geopolitical tensions. When I wrote the question, nothing was happening in the Red Sea. So now we have to add the Taiwan Strait, the Red Sea, and many other places which could put us in a very difficult position with, among other things, the supply of the critical raw materials. So I will start with giving the floor to Roman, and then it's up to you.
Thank you, Angel. Well, I think that that the approach we have in Europe to deal with, let's say, to curb strategic dependencies or to deal with supply chain distress under the umbrella of the open strategic autonomy approach is basically can be explained with three different fronts. The first one is basically trade. I think that here we need to be ready to diversify our trade there where it is possible and necessary in order to be able to, for example, make sure that disruptions will not be heavily affecting certain, for example, raw materials which are essential for our green transition. And Guillaume was mentioning some of those before. So I think trade diversification is very important, and to work together with our international partners, like-minded partners, but also resource-rich countries, in order to be able, to have a portfolio, of suppliers that also, is the right one, let's say, for the type of disruptions and the type of problems that we might be having in the future with some of these raw materials or other types of inputs. So the first one is trade. Of course, always, let's say, avoiding to turn into, let's say, protectionistic, we can do everything on our own in Europe for everything. which is also not really making sense in this context. But for example, recently there was a number of international partnerships that were launched, and Guillaume, you said that a colleague of yours would touch upon them later, so I will not dwell on them. But with Canada, with Ukraine, even with Namibia, with Kazakhstan, with Chile, and many other international partners. So I think that is an important part. The second one is to see where we want to act autonomously. I was saying before, open strategic autonomy is about working together, let's say, or acting in a cooperative fashion and working with like-minded partners and other, whatever we can, and then kind of acting autonomously to secure the EU's interest there where it is possible and there where we need to do it. So I think that building a certain level of strategic capacity is something that is extremely important in cases particularly where the opportunities to do this through trade are more limited and where we need to reduce risks. So we're working to develop capacities, for example, in critical raw materials, so the Critical Raw Materials Act that Guillaume was referring to, which is a law at EU level that will allow us to work in different fronts to meet the targets that were very clearly displayed there. Another one is, for example, what we call NZIA. NZIA is a very difficult to pronounce acronym, but it's the Net Zero Industry Act. So it's again, a law that has been, or is, that is being put on the table at EU level. And what it will do is somehow to try to foster the creation of capacity around emerging clean technologies there where it is needed. And it's not only investments, which are very important, but it's also skills available, to do the right technological change, in some of these areas where there is a big lack of skills, for example, for solar panels, to people that have engineers that have the competencies to do this, but also in other areas. So there, I think the second kind of block is strategic capacity building where it is needed. And the third block, in my view, is to better understand what is happening so that we can anticipate what is coming, have the right measures, have early warning system that detects there is a problem that is going to emerge here or there. And that's a little bit the type of work that I was putting before on the slides for you, but also the type of work that Eshel was referring to before. So using foresight as well, and related techniques to try to kind of have a conversation about the future where we see what are different foreseeable futures. And in these different futures, what are the different types of paths of policies that we need to follow or sets of instruments that we need to put in place in order to be able to navigate through this complex and changing world that we live in. Thank you.
So now finally it's your turn, Angelo and Marcin, so the floor is yours.
So the science fiction part.
Science fiction part.
Yeah. So I don't have, unfortunately, the crystal ball to look and see what will happen. But you could see today around this building that we live in highly disruptive times. And there is a lot of geopolitical uncertainty in the world. It's not the safe and stable environment presently. And the safety and stability is exactly what the investments in critical raw materials need. Because if you take, for example, opening a mine, you look at something like 15 years horizon before you start investing and to obtain the first materials. And as it was said here, we are dependent on China on many raw materials, but also there are countries like Democratic Republic of Congo that from which we take 2/3 of the cobalt that we use in electric vehicles, for example. And this country is in a permanent crisis, political and economic, for decades. So I will give you two examples of how geopolitics may increase risks in critical raw materials supply. You are an economy student, so I prepared one from demand side and one from supply side. From the supply side, let's take Taiwan as it was suggested. So it's very unclear what could happen and what would be the consequences, but there is a sort of agreement among experts that this would be much worse for Europe and for the world than the war in Russia. And it's for critical raw materials. It's not because Taiwan has many critical raw materials and it's an important player in this, but mostly it would be the semiconductors. But the problem is that if China was to invade Taiwan or escalate the situation, then we would have to respond. And China has so many critical raw materials. So you'd have to have sanctions and deterioration of economic ties, and that would be a big effect, much bigger than with Russia. But having said all this, it's not entirely sure how this would play for the critical raw materials, because, for example, let's take the case of Russia. Both the United States and EU are still buying enriched uranium to use in the nuclear sector for the power plants. Also, even though there is a sanctions on oil, coal, steel, and timber, you still have trade in critical raw materials like titanium and platinum, which is worth billions every year. So this has not stopped because of the war. So it's impossible to say what would happen, but there is a possibility that the trade in critical raw materials would not be entirely cut off. Now let's take the demand side. An example everybody's discussing recently. Let's assume that Donald Trump is the president of the US. So we are dependent on US on only one critical raw material, which is beryllium, used also in electric vehicles. They also sell 2/3 of all that we buy in Europe. So the risk is not that they will cut off supply, but something different, that they would take a much more competing position towards the EU. So we are globally having this shift to the digital and green technology and higher spending on defense, and for all these you need critical raw materials. And this made them like a geopolitical good, so to say, something that can help countries compete, that can be used to build the industries of the future. So you can imagine Donald Trump, he viewed international trade as a zero-sum game where one side wins and another loses. So here we would have a much more aggressive politics from them, and we have certain initiatives now that are trying to increase our cooperation, like critical minerals agreement with the US, and that would probably be, this is negotiated now, that will probably be put on hold. And one thing we don't have that the United States has is that they can use the defense budget to improve their position in critical minerals chains, and something we don't have at the EU level. So I think the most dangerous shocks and situations are in the short and medium term, because you have this constant increase in demand and the concentration in many countries of the production. And this is not only because the critical minerals are there, but also because they had economic strategies that support this industry, that are processing and refining for many years, and they reached economies of scale. But with some, so in longer term, this can be mitigated because you can develop this in other countries or find new sources of critical raw materials. But in the shorter time, it's much more difficult. Thank you.
So I have the ugly job of having the last intervention, and the colleagues have pretty much covered everything that there is to say. My intervention was to be more on Latin America, because last year, in the context of our strategy for lithium that the colleagues have expanded upon, we had the EU strategy with Latin America, and several heads of state and government that actually visited Latin American countries, and specifically the three that create the lithium triangle, meaning Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia, to go and secure the stocks. But as it has been said many times, I will try to recapitulate a bit. There is a big importance in securing, indeed, our supply chains. But as the colleagues have said before, it's not only to secure the supply chain of mining it and bringing it to us, but it's also to process it. And until now, most of the processing has been done in third countries, in China. So this is something that we need to change in the near future, and it's not something that we can do, unfortunately, with an international agreement. It's something that we have to decide within Europe. Something else that we need to do is indeed to use our crystal ball, or to see what the possibilities in the next few years would be, because until now, in the process of globalization, we tended to think that, okay, we are a trade superpower, we have good trade relations with most or with many, we will be able to secure this. Now we see that many countries are actually withdrawing on themselves, might actually create obstacles to that. And not only obstacles, as we said before, in mining, but in selling to us, but in refining. We see Australia, for example, was mining a certain portion of critical minerals. It was sending it to China. Now they decided, no, to do some part of the processing themselves, just like we do just like we decided that we're going to do in Europe. So this year, 2024, is a year where we're going to have many elections. In fact, it's going to be, I think, one of the years with the most elections in the globe. We cannot possibly predict who is going to come out and what their policies are going to be. Similarly, we have policies that are going to be taken in the member states. So for the moment, we have a certain position of the EU, but soon we have the new European Parliament elections. We have a new commission that will be. So there is a lot of known unknowns. Who is going to decide? We have the acts that we have explained. We have the strategies that we have tried to summarily propose. Sorry, but unfortunately or fortunately, the future will show what our let's say the next steps in our securing the supply chains and the necessary indeed the supply chains and the necessary critical raw materials in Europe. Now I'm gonna stop here because I see that we're almost done, and maybe we should take some questions from the...
Yeah,
I'm good.
okay. So thank you very much to all of you. It has been really, really, really interesting. So I have probably 200 questions prepared for them, but I will refrain myself to ask. So I give the floor to you if you have any question, any doubts. So please, it's your time. This is why you are here.
Hi, so my name is Irene. I actually work here at the Parliament. I first want to start by thanking you, all of you who work at the EPRS and are sitting at the table today. Your work is amazing, and we would not be able to do ours without you. So first, I want to thank you. I don't know if you know who the PRS is, but it's the Parliament Research Service. They basically have a phone that we call and ask random stuff, and they produce it because it's magical. But I have a couple of questions. I will reframe myself, just as Angel has said, because I have a lot of them. But two things mainly. First of all, you said that you're working, you went to Latin America. In our office, we are Jordi Cañas, he's head of the delegation to Mercosur. We're very interested in everything that has to do with Latin America. And I was just wondering, like, did you go there to make sure, like, to learn something about processing raw materials?
Sorry, the we was more as as the European Union.
As the European
Was it?
Union, yes, as I know. But anyways, I do mean to ask that because if so, I think that's something super interesting that we should it's a comment, it's just something super interesting that we should explore more when dealing with Latin America. And it's good to know that we are paying attention to it. And then we talked about numbers and how much. And I think since all of you are analysts, and we have the commission here, which is the numbers, always. But how do we then explain this to people in order to avoid what's happening outside today? Because I think this is something that if you sit down and you talk for 3 hours and you really think about it, it's super easy to understand. But I think it would be interesting also to see how we could do it. Like, how can we explain this to citizens in an easy way that they won't be like, okay, but what I'm doing, what we are doing, what's happening to us? Am I clear in my question? See? Okay.
Do you take the first one?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, well, with regards to Latin America, I'm sure you know it better than me, but we had a different value proposition. And this is, I think, one of the strong points that we can actually go to with regards to diversifying our supply chains. When we went to Latin America last year, the value proposition was that the European Union cares about human rights, cares about the environment more than other partners, international partners may do. They might lower the cost, they might do it on a different thing, but we have this other proposition. Now, Latin America is also a long-time ally. We have good relations with most of those countries. So it's something easier that we could do. And given that lithium is is highly concentrated there and it's important going forward, it was an important step. There are other situations where either, for example, as Guillaume said before, Norway wants to mine its deep seabed, meaning lower than 200 meters, because they said, okay, we found minerals, we found rare earths there. Okay, let's do it. But if they do it and they don't do it correctly, then the whole stock of fish might be depleted. They might do it without a way that is environmentally sustainable. And this is where the European Parliament comes, and we say, okay, we would look forward to a cooperation in raw materials and other things. However, we stress on the fact that it must be done in an environmentally sustainable way. Now, given that we have a good relation with Norway for the moment, and given that the first part of this deep sea mining is just exploration, it's not actual mining for the moment, we can follow up and try to build concretely on the way that this is going to happen. With other cases, with other countries where we have less good trade relations or no trade relations, or where there are other issues, then it might be a bit more difficult to secure the critical minerals. With regards to the second question, a very quick presentation, I think that there are elements that we can actually use because Guillaume, in the 10 issues to watch, for example, he was talking about the car industry. And in the context of the car industry, he mentioned the Critical Raw Materials Act. And in the context of the Critical Raw Materials Act, there's a big portion on recycling. Recycling is done by the actual companies. It's not only something that we're going to take at EU level and say, voila, we're going to take care of the recycling. No, it's companies that need to engage in recycling, and they need to see that it's important for them. It's citizens on a wider scale that need to think, okay, there is a planned obsolescence in this thing. It's going to be destroyed in 2-3 years, for example, but there are other more environmentally sustainable ways, other ways to deal with phones and to consume all those things that use the critical minerals that might be better for all of us. So this is something for each and every one of us. I'm going to continue.
Thank you very much. Excellent. On this question, on the second question, Irene, I love the quote from Jean-Claude Juncker. Probably you know of it. That's, of course, we know what to do. What we don't know is how to win the election later. So I think that's the real problem. So any question from the floor? No? Don't be shy. We are here. The parliament is paying for us to go to stay here. Anna, please.
So my question doesn't have anything to do with the open strategic autonomy, but it was more about the upcoming elections and the rise of anti-European and nationalist parties and all. How do you perceive those movements from the European Union? How do you understand them? How do you think you can cope with them?
Okay, more crystal ball. So who's going to take that? Itself?
Of course, we are not the politicians who decide in the end on how to take on people who don't share our own opinion. I mean, we are the civil servants of the institutions, and as such, we are neutral in the provision of our services to members. And we would not make a difference, and we do also now not make any differences between the party of a member. So that has no influence on our work, actually. Don't know whether that is different in the Commission, but I don't think so.
No, in the Commission it's not different either, of course. But it's a very interesting point. I was trying to talk in the beginning of my presentation about polarization, inequality, etc., because it's a phenomena that are currently out there. And we actually hired Andrés Rodríguez Pose as expert to work with us last year in 2023 in my Directorate General, and he wrote for us a very enticing paper, which is about how this kind of discontent that is emerging from regions and that are kind of left behind the economic mainstream may also be impacted by the green transition. Because, of course, in some of those regions that are already lagging behind, might not be best placed as well to reap all the opportunities from the technological transformation linked to the green transition, or they might not be well endowed in terms of the skills necessary, to make that transformation, for example. So there is a risk that if it's not well managed with appropriate policies, that would foster innovation, diffusion, regional convergence, etc., that you might be introducing an additional layer that could also, as well to some extent exert an influence, on the kind of polarization, and have links then, to voting behavior and so on. So, I'm not saying this is this is not an official position of the institutions, but I thought it was a very interesting analysis because it shows how you have to keep as well, an eye opening on the matters that you were precisely mentioning here. So I hope this was kind of neutral and enough as a civil servant, but still, trying to give you an answer.
Any questions? Finish? Can I ask just one? Thank you. No, I prepared one question about the role of South America, especially, and the Mercosur treaty. Yeah, and it's regretfully Jordi is not here because he's the chairman of the committee here for Mercosur, and something what is happening outside is related to Mercosur at the scene. And the second question, and I don't know if it's for Angelo or if it's for Guillaume. My question was about the decoupling from China. Yes, we are thinking of open strategic autonomy, so we keep on having a strong position of free trade, but at the same time, what we would like is a safe trade. And I don't know if we are going in the right direction with China, or we are just keep the thing as they are. So.
Well, it's a very easy question. No, what I just can say that there are many developments currently at EU level to address this issue. You mentioned the Net Zero Industry Act. You also have the new battery regulation, which introduced some obligations to use only some specific critical materials sustainably produced, etc. So it will have a role on the supply, where we supply our critical raw materials for batteries from. There is also this new economic strategy package that was published last week by the Commission to try to tackle these aggressive actions by China sometimes. Like we mentioned the export controls on germanium, gallium, and graphite, a recent one. So this is a major current issue that is in many minds, also in the politicians' minds. So we'll see in the next years what will happen.
Hi. Continuing with China de-risking strategy, in your presentation you mentioned you spot 64 materials. We are depending on China on a regular basis. What is the strategy of the Commission regarding that? Is to find possible other suppliers, or how we are guaranteeing these 64 products that we consume from China, given the situation? Thank you.
Thank you. It's again a very good question. I mean, what we did was basically to determine this was not only critical raw materials. I mean, this includes, of course, some critical raw materials, but it includes also some final goods, some intermediate goods. So it's a mixed bag of dependencies. This does not mean that, and out of those, actually, out of the 64, I think it was like only a subset of those that were where the Europe was actually facing real choke points or very precise vulnerabilities. But this does not mean that, let's say, a number of measures are activated immediately, when you face dependencies of the EU vis-a-vis third partner countries. It depends a little bit on what was kind of mentioned in the last question. No? I mean, to what extent some of is there a kind of a de-risking strategy, so to say, in relation to those dependencies, whether they are from China or from other third partner country. And I think that here that the way to go is definitely, first of all, as I was saying before, diversification of supplies. So for many of those raw materials, particularly or intermediate inputs, particularly the ones where you have choke points, it could be wise, let's say, to look at the possible alternatives to diversify supply. Then in line with the Net Zero Industry Act, for example, that Guillaume was talking about before, there are also some targets for kind of reducing the level of dependency from abroad and trying to spark a certain level of production, so if you want, of building rather than production, actually building industrial capacity inside the EU for some of those that are particularly critical, and that's in the Net Zero Industry Act. So I think these are the types of measures. So it's diversification, and that is trade, is considering there where the vulnerabilities are particularly strong and where at EU level we have decided to go in that direction to see what is the best approach to build a certain level of capacity. And then there is the issue indeed, of better understanding whether these dependencies, are persistent over time, or whether there are some other elements such as disruptions which come on top of the dependencies which make them even more critical or vulnerable. So I think these are for me like the three main axes. But thank you for the question.
That's the last one. I'm sorry. So we are running out of time. So first, thank you very much to all of you for your excellent presentation and the debate. Thank you to all of you for the audience. Thank you to Jordi and especially to Irene and the whole team, because they have been very supportive through the whole time, even this morning in moments of real stress for me, but at the end we could make it. And thanks to Irene, the good thing is we have to go to the House of Europe now at 3:30, not 3. So we have some extra time to grab a sandwich and a drink before to go there. Okay? So, thank you.